time to reflect. The Walleye struggle delayed and disrupted the Los Angelisation of Sydney, drove the motorways underground and put in place a rail alternative. It was a strategic victory, but the war wasn't won. Walking through Girrawheen Park, it seems incredible that any government could have contemplated destroying such a priceless asset for a motorway. The Walleye Valley was only saved by a tenacious struggle lasting more than 2 decades, but many valuable natural places, beautiful built environments and communities have been destroyed by a mad and discredited vision.
The city of tomorrow, engineers say, will tend first to vastness. Gigantic buildings connected by wide suspended roadways on which traffic will speed at unheard of rates. Traffic handled in huge underground tunnels, aerial ways, and in the air itself. Helicopter planes capable of maneuvering about between buildings and rooftop airports will take the place of the ground taxi. Each building will be virtually a city in itself, completely self-sustaining, receiving its supplies from great merchandise ways far below the ground. Dwellers and workers in the buildings may go weeks without setting foot on the ground. In this city, smoke will be eliminated, noise will be conquered, and impurity will be eliminated from the air.
By the time those words appeared in Amazing Story magazine in 1939, the futurists and modernists had created in their minds a vision of the automotive city of the near future. In 1922, Le Corbusier had dreamed of pulling down much of Baron Haussmann's Paris to build the freeway-based Radiant City, and as the Second World War approached, futurist visions of the coming automotive utopia proliferated. If Le Corbusier was the father of the high-rise automobile city, Norman Bell Geddes was its publicist. Geddes is little remembered today, but his influence on 2 generations of road engineers and planners can hardly be exaggerated. Originally a stage designer, Geddes also dabbled in industrial design, including impractical futurist cars and luxury airliners that could never have flown. General Motors, in its relentless campaign for the freeway future, did well to hire him. For the 1939 New York World's Fair, Geddes created Futurama, a huge and detailed model of the expressway city and countryside of 1960, and there was an accompanying much-read book, Magic Motorways. What was missing was any input from maths, physics, or even common sense. These must either be completely new cities in new locations, or they must involve the wholesale levelling and complete rebuilding from the ground up of the old ones. Either way, the future Bell Geddes depicted would have required a staggering amount of energy, both in construction and operation, and it certainly wasn't going to happen by 1960. Bell Geddes' key doctrine was the complete grade separation of local and through traffic and of pedestrians from both. The simple, cheap footpath and the pedestrian crossing were to be banished in favour of walkways elevated alongside and crossing over all the roads. That way you could fit an extra couple of lanes on each road. Everything that had made cities attractive and livable was sacrificed on the altar of the car. To the extent that the Le Corbusier-Bell Geddes vision was realised, it was an unmitigated disaster. That the magic motorways generated more new traffic than they could handle and caused urban sprawl was realised very quickly. What wouldn't be grasped for decades was that profligate petroleum fuel consumption and the stupendous quantities of concrete required for roads and high-rise buildings poured carbon into the atmosphere, driving global warming. The striking thing is this: the futurist vision of the coming urban automotive utopia was just goddamn awful. It was the opposite of everything that Bill Geddes and that writer from Amazing Stories magazine promised. It was ugly, noisy, polluted, alienating, and dysfunctional. What the majority aspired to was modest scale, quiet, intimate, green, evolved, unthreatening, unpolluted. In fact, an urban environment that's epitomised by the mix of housing and the retail strips of Sydney's old inner suburbs. The very suburbs that the engineers regarded as intractable slums, fit only to be bulldozed for freeways. The motorway advocates are fond of arguing that if their next project doesn't proceed immediately and in full, Sydney will grind rapidly to a halt and we'll all be condemned to a life that's nasty, brutish and short. Let's subject that to a reality check. In fact, the freeway paradigm is now very old, outdated, discredited. Mussolini built the first freeway almost a century ago. Almost a century ago, Le Corbusier wanted to destroy much of historic Paris to build the Radiant City, which happily never happened. Bill Geddes' Futurama, 75 years ago, foresaw an all-automobile, all-freeway urban society by 1960. It's now 67 years since the 1948 County of Cumberland Plan envisaged a web of radial freeways focused on Sydney's CBD, without which it goes without saying our city would decline into squalor and chaos. But more than 20 years passed before they actually tried to implement it, and then it encountered bitter opposition. And that's because by the early 1970s the results were in from the US freeway experiment, and anybody who wasn't brain dead or employed by the Department of Main Roads could see that the paradigm was a failure. And that's 40 years ago. So why is Sydney the tollway capital of the world, and why does a government obsession with motorways persist despite all the evidence? It's largely down to this man, Nicholas Frank Hugo Greiner, whose role in the motorway saga didn't end with his demise as Premier of New South Wales. When the motorway push, led by the Department of Main Roads, faltered, it was Greiner who seized on the idea that handing over the system to tollway corporations would harness the profit motive to drive their expansion. Privatisation began with the transfer of a section of the M4 to statewide roads, so it could be tolled to fund the M4 missing link. A month after the link opened, Greiner was forced to resign. He went on to be associated with the private lessees of the road and later a director of the tollway giant Transurban. What began with motorways spread to the rest of infrastructure procurement and operation, and now to urban renewal. From the Greiner government onwards, the firewall between business and government, between the public and the private, has gradually disintegrated. Corruption and nepotism has now been legalised and turbocharged, and the planning process has become ever more secretive, developer-driven and despotic. Pop-up government micro-agencies, headed by powerful industry lobby group CEOs and corporate barons, excused conflict of interest, appear and disappear with bewildering frequency. Infrastructure New South Wales, that one was headed by Nick Greiner himself. WestConnex Delivery Authority, Hunter Development Corporation, Urban Growth New South Wales, Sydney Motorway Corporation. These micro-agencies directly represent narrow corporate agendas. They don't care about homes and heritage, parks and playing fields, schools or childcare, greenhouse emissions or air pollution, and as far as they're concerned, the more traffic the better. Sustainability simply isn't on their agenda. WestConnex strikes me as a last frenzied attempt to put in place the 1948 radial freeway scheme. The difference now is that a staggering 30 kilometres of tollway would be built underground at vast expense, and thousands of homes and businesses are slated for resumption for high-rise apartments to generate the extra traffic to make the tollway work. The whole thing has about it a desperate air of hubris and overreach. In fact, the conscienceless coalition of tollway interests, construction and development companies and banks is far from all powerful, and as the Walleye struggle shows, the triumph of their schemes is not inevitable. In 1998, the Carr Labor government promised to consolidate the Walleye Valley's open space and bushland as one 50-hectare regional park. Carr never followed through on that simple administrative commitment, and neither has any subsequent government. This fact reflects the mainstream party's prevailing lack of interest in, even contempt for, the urban natural environment. But that hasn't stopped things going forward.
If you go down to the creek today, you'll find that southwest Sydney's last bush valley is a hive of wildlife and human activity.
Sometimes if you're very, very gentle, you can get it out of soft soil like this, but you have to pull very slowly and gently.
While the state government has switched off, the community and local government have taken up the challenge. Working with a trickle of funding, weeds have been removed, bushland restored, pollution reduced, and wildlife habitat created and improved. It's now a much-loved place of reflection, recreation and education. But for my money, the annual Walleye Creek Batwatch picnic shows most beautifully what the fight for this valley was all about. The preservation within our city of the green islands and corridors that connect us to nature. The flying foxes didn't arrive until after the valley had been saved, and their flourishing roost lies in the path the 8-lane surface motorway would have taken. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed saving Walleye Creek as much as I enjoyed making it.